Hello everyone. There's been a lot of hype and noise and energy invested into building up and celebrating OWCS starting. We've done it on this channel, the power rankings, roster mania, looking at all the new and exciting things we're going to see in this year of Overwatch esports. But in today's video, I want to maybe take a look at the other side of the coin. I don't want this to be necessarily a sad video, but I think it's important when you sort of lose players to retirement or they stop competing, especially players with significant achievements, it's worth taking a moment to remember that and think about that. So I thought before all the action kicks off this week, we should take a look at some of the players who were in OWL last season who won't be competing in OWCS so far this season. Now I am conscious, I don't want this to play necessarily like that moment at the Oscars where we play the sad music and we look at all the artists and contributors to the industry we've lost over the year. It's not that sad. They've only just stopped playing Overwatch, and for lots of these players it might also mean they're still going to compete, but they're not competing this season, or maybe they even end up as an import on some other team. That's maybe potentially true for Spectra or somebody. But a lot of these players, some have already announced retirements, now they're going to the military, and this obviously happens every OWL season. And players will retire. Players won't come back for next season. But I think, obviously, with a shift from OWL to OWCS, this is probably one of the bigger shifts and the bigger portions of players we've lost, especially from the Korean area. So I want to give credit. This video was originally inspired by a Reddit thread I read, very much along this same vein of which Korean players are left after the roster lock, which ones didn't find teams, which ones won't we see competing again. And I want to give a special shout out to Fun Injury 5925, who actually compiled this list that was the basis of what we see in front of us now on my latest installment of Man Talks About Spreadsheet. But this list is pretty large. I think especially it's maybe not disproportionately large to previous seasons where we've seen players retire or step back or move to coaching, maybe say in like Yaki's case. But I think when we look at the quality of the players retiring, there's a hugely dramatic ramp up in terms of the number of high quality players, like people like Prophet and Striker and Birdring. These are really very much DPS who have been around forever, legends kind of in their own right. Birdring did very well last year, one of the best Sombras going. Likewise, if we look at some of these players, I mean, half the Houston Outlaws team is here in Pelican, Happy and Fearless, and I know Pelican still streams regularly, and I'm sure quite a few of these players do still stream regularly. But I think it's important just to sort of take a look through, remind ourselves of some of the players we're not going to be seeing again. And I think just taking a moment for that, because even someone like Void, who maybe hasn't had a good season in Overwatch League in a while, was one of the top players originally, one of the top off-tanks, I think, alongside Fury. Those were kind of the names that we thrown around when you talked about Korean off-tanks. Obviously, everyone knows about Fearless, one of the best Winstons going. Maybe he'll make a return after his military service, but certainly a shock to lose him, especially when you consider he was maybe an option at one point for EU and NA teams as well. Then once we get to the flex DPS, we talked in our roster mania video and our power rankings video about how stacked this role is in South Korea, but it's even more stacked when you look at some of the players we're losing from this role. Pelican's not competing in this first season of OWCS as far as we know. Sparkle and Edison, the DPS core who won Season 5, obviously their coach Rush as well, currently not with a team as well. And this core of players, when I think back to that Dallas Season 5 team, they weren't just good to the degree they were able to win the Overwatch League. They were really trendsetters and people would watch them. I know us on London Spitfire, we took a lot of inspiration from them across that year. I know Toronto very much did the same, and I think most teams in the league did. They were really the meta setters in a lot of situations. If Dallas were doing it, you'd want to do what Dallas did. Can you try and copy them, emulate them, learn from them as much as possible? So when the core of some of these players aren't even going to be competing, it certainly does feel like it must be a loss, therefore, to the scene as a whole. And while there's still plenty of good players, and there'll be new good players coming through that we don't even know the names of yet, I wanted to make this video just to highlight some of the people we are losing. And even though some like Yaki are still going on to coach and maybe didn't have quite as decorated a career, there's a lot of talent. I mean, maybe someone like Striker, who has been around for so long, maybe it's really possible that Because Krusty and Junkbuck are on Falcons, now the mid-season, mid-year striker signing, the yearly tradition that has been kept up for so long, will still be happening. And even though it seems improbable now, we'll see striker on Falcons mid-season. It seems impossible now, but you would have said that a lot of times if I told you striker would find his way back to Shock mid-season. So don't rule it out just yet. Likewise on HitScan, obviously players like Birdring and Happy have had pretty storied careers, continued success. Fitz, a player who lots of people regarded as highly talented, even if maybe his reputation for interpersonal skills wasn't to quite the same level. MN3 and Ezhan, even quite younger players, maybe never quite hit the heights people would have hoped. Hisu is a player who had, for a long period when he was on that Philly team, he was really up there as quite a highly desired prospect, as his Sombra was so good, but his hitscan was still good. Was a big carry for Toronto early on. He's going to be gone. When we get over to the supports as well, maybe the main supports, a lot of the best main supports are still playing, and you can make an argument, I don't want to single anyone out here, but you can make an argument that some of these players are the sort of players who just retire or don't get another shot every Overwatch League season. But I just still do want to highlight some of them, particularly someone like Skewed, who for a long time was the third piece, maybe the B guy behind Shu and Astro quite often in Gladiators, but very much came into his own on Soul Inferno as the main guy. And now we're not going to see him ever really get a proper chance in a top team like that, where he is the main flex support, the starting guy. Twilight, probably one of the best Annas we've ever seen. Even if his other heroes never quite lived up to that same height, unbelievable an Anna, would do things that only really Shu could do. And he's not going to be competing either. Similarly, again, we get in this sort of wave of players like Babel, Creative, Krillin, who sort of have been in the league and maybe had enough years to have their shot and hadn't quite left the same legacy. But we're still losing pretty reasonably talented players here. I think for me, even if we were to go through and create like the best of the retired team, you put something just like Fearless and Pelican, and maybe at a certain point I'm just building with Houston Outlaws. But you do something like this, Pelican, Birdring, Skewed. Maybe we're struggling a little bit more for main support, but even if you put, say, Lastro in this position or something, I mean, this is a team that could quite easily compete in OWCS. If I was to add a team like this to my power rankings in South Korea, they'd do all right. They maybe wouldn't be top 2 or top 4, but they'd be competitive for those qualification spots. But this is where we sort of get to the root cause of all of this, where actually loads of these players aren't competing because even though OWCS is shiny and new now, and I think we should embrace it and give it its best shot and enjoy it as much as we can, we should also appreciate that this is the other side of what life after the Overwatch League looks like, where a lot of these players, there is not financial opportunities for these players to continue competing, and especially for the older players, the Birdrings, the Fearless, even Sparkle, Edison, Happy, they all fall into this category. If it's not financially possible anymore, then it's not possible for them. They're too old to just be able to get away with it or go back to uni and do a little bit of both or something, or some kind of collegiate system like they do in America. And there's not these options for a lot of the Korean players, and because their talent pool is so crammed full of talent, there's not spots for players that would quite easily get onto loads of these European and American teams. And it's fair to say that of all the regions, South Korea has probably suffered the most at this because they have the most talent locked in and the most densely populated pools of talent. So it's sad. I think it's the sort of thing that maybe happens in time anyway, that players retire and they fall out, but it certainly seems like some people's hands have been forced quicker than they would have been otherwise, and we maybe would have got to see these players still compete on top teams. Do I really think if there was another year of Overwatch League that we wouldn't have actually seen Fearless, Pelican, and maybe Happy all retained by the Houston Outlaws and having one more shot with Junkbuck and all of this? Really think it would have happened. So it is sad to see a lot of these players go. It's obviously not necessarily the end for all of them. Some obviously have lent into their retirement, but others, we might see them partway through a WCS to replace a player. We might see them come in for the second stage. We might see them return maybe for the Esports World Cup in the middle of the year if someone puts together a super talented best of the rest kind of roster. So it's not impossible that we see it. We've never seen these players again. But I think it's worth remembering some of the people, again, I don't want this to make it into like a Oscars, people we've lost, but some of the people we won't be see competing this year. I think it's important to remember that, especially in this week as we build up to the start of a group stage in Korea, all of the players who are there should be celebrated and praised, and we'll get to see how well they do, and it is exciting. But we should also remember all of the players we've lost and some of the negative side effects of losing the financial support system that was the Overwatch League. Thank you for watching today, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.